The distress signal. The galaxy was in trouble. For years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace across countless star systems. But now, the darkness of war was closing in. The once mighty fleet of the Council was now fractured, its forces weak and scattered. Alien invaders, an unstoppable force, had pushed through the galaxy's defenses, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. It was as if the universe itself had abandoned hope. Worlds burned. Cities fell. People cried out in desperation, but no one came to help. In the darkest corner of the galaxy, one final chance was being made. The last surviving members of the Galactic Council had decided to send an SOS, a signal to anyone, anything that might help. It was a final attempt to find hope where none existed. The message was simple, urgent, and sent in every possible frequency. To any civilization who can hear this, the galaxy is falling. We are outnumbered. We need help. The signal was sent, echoing across the stars. Yet there was no immediate response. For hours, there was nothing but silence. The galaxy had already been abandoned by many, and it seemed no one was willing to answer the call. But just as hope began to fade, something unusual happened. A strange, unfamiliar frequency came through, breaking the endless silence. It wasn't a response from another ally or a fleet that could help. No, it was something far more dangerous. At first it was just a hum, a low rhythmic pulse. Then a voice, cold and filled with authority, echoed in the silence. The message was simple. The Deathworlders have heard your call. The Galactic Council's command center was stunned. The name Deathworlders was one that haunted many across the galaxy. It was a name spoken only in whispers, a name that invoked fear in the hearts of every alien civilization. The Deathworlders were a mysterious and terrifying race, unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. They came from worlds so harsh, so hostile, that no other species could survive. Their power was unmatched, and their reputation for ruthlessness was legendary. The council officers exchanged nervous glances. Some were relieved. Perhaps the Deathworlders could help. Others were not so sure. What if the Deathworlders didn't come as allies? What if they came as conquerors? As the message ended, the officers knew they had no choice. They had sent the SOS in desperation, and now they were left with only one option. They had to trust the Deathworlders, whether they liked it or not. But what did it mean that the Deathworlders had responded? Why did they choose to answer the call now, after so many years of silence? The galaxy was about to find out. With no time to waste, the Council ordered their fleet to prepare for whatever might come. The tension in the room was thick. Ships were hastily repaired, soldiers readied their weapons, and commanders studied every report they could find about the Deathworlders. And then, as if to answer their questions, something appeared in the distance. A massive fleet, larger than anything the Council had ever seen, emerged from the black void of space. Their ships were enormous, almost otherworldly. The Deathworlders had arrived. The fleet was silent as it glided closer, like a shadow that stretched across the stars. The Council's ships, still in disarray, tried to make sense of what was happening. The Deathworlders' fleet didn't seem to follow any patterns they recognized. Their ships didn't have the same markings or technology as any other species. They seemed to exist outside of all known rules. The Council's lead officer, General Soren, stood in front of the view screen, staring at the fleet that was now looming ahead. His mind raced. What would happen next? Would the Deathworlders decide to help them, or was this the beginning of the end? The screen flickered, and a transmission came through. It was not a voice. It was a message, short and direct. Prepare for battle. Soren's heart sank. The galaxy's last hope had just arrived, but they were not here to save them. The Deathworlders had come to see if the galaxy was worth saving at all. The Council had sent an SOS, but the answer they received was not what they had expected. Instead of an alliance, they faced a test of strength, of will, of survival. The Deathworlders weren't here to offer mercy. They were here to judge. And now it was too late to back out. The galaxy's fate was in the hands of the most feared and mysterious race in the universe. General Soren turned to his officers, his face grim. Get ready for what's to come. We can't afford to fail. The galaxy's last hope wasn't coming in the form of a savior. It was coming in the form of something far more terrifying. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they were about to change everything. The signal had been sent, and the consequences were now unfolding. The galaxy had no idea what would happen next, but they were about to find out. The deadly arrival. The galaxy's heart raced as the immense shadow of the Deathworlders' fleet loomed ever closer. The ships were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Towering, imposing, and menacing, their sleek hulls glinted under the distant light of dying stars. The silence that surrounded them was suffocating, almost as if the universe itself held its breath. General Soren stood at the front of the command deck, his face a mask of tension. His hands gripped the rail in front of him as his mind raced through every possibility. The Deathworlders had answered their call, but not with an army of salvation. No, they had come with something else. What did they want? "Sir, we're receiving their transmission." A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Commander Area, the communications officer. Soren's pulse quickened. He knew this moment could change everything. This wasn't just a message. This was their future, their last chance to survive. The Council had made their choice, but it had led them to this, a confrontation they never expected. "Put it on screen," Soren ordered, his voice sharp. The view screen flickered to life, and for a brief moment, all they saw were the cold, mechanical eyes of the Deathworlders ship, looking as if they were studying the Council's pitiful fleet. The screen shifted, and then it was a voice, a deep, unsettling voice that filled the entire room. "You called for help. Now you will face the consequences of your request." There was no kindness in the words, no warmth, just cold, harsh reality. Soren clenched his fists. The voice on the screen was unmistakably alien, but it was also something else, filled with the weight of millennia of power and violence. The Deathworlders were not here to negotiate. They were here to impose their will. "Tell me what you want," Soren said, his voice calm despite the turmoil inside him. He had to stay in control. They couldn't afford to lose their composure. The screen blinked, and suddenly the words that followed sent a chill down his spine. "We want to see if you are worthy of survival." The transmission cut out abruptly, and the room fell into an eerie silence. "Worthy of survival," Commander Area whispered, barely able to contain the disbelief in her voice. "What does that even mean?" "It means they are going to test us," Soren said, his voice barely a murmur. He turned to face his crew. "Prepare for battle. We're going to have to prove ourselves worthy of this galaxy's future. But no matter what happens, we stand together." Outside the command center, the enormous Deathworlder fleet hovered ominously, like a predator sizing up its prey. The Council's fleet was pitifully small in comparison, outclassed and under-equipped. But the Council had no choice but to engage. They had no other options left. As the first wave of the Deathworlder ships began to power up their weapons, the air in the command center felt thick with dread. Their ships were silent, yet the power radiating from them was almost tangible. Soren's officers scrambled to get their weapons ready, their hands shaking as they worked. They were facing a force unlike anything they had ever encountered. The Deathworlders were not like any other species. Their reputation for ruthless efficiency and overwhelming force preceded them. If they were here to judge, there was no guarantee that the galaxy would survive. For hours, the fleets remained locked in a tense standoff. The Council's ships positioned themselves in defensive formations, but the Deathworlders did not move. They seemed to be waiting for something, perhaps for the first sign of weakness, the first mistake that would reveal the true cost of their intervention. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the first salvo from the Deathworlder fleet launched. A bright, blinding flash lit up the void of space, followed by an explosion that shook the entire fleet. The Council's ships were caught off guard, their shields barely holding up against the immense power. The sound of the blast echoed in the command room, even though sound could not travel in space. It was as if the force of the blast had ruptured the very air they breathed. General Soren staggered, but he held his ground, his eyes fixed on the screen. More explosions followed, and the Council's fleet began to break apart under the onslaught. Ships spun out of control, flames trailing in their wake. The screen flickered as another wave of enemy fire struck. The Deathworlders' weapons were terrifying, unmatched by anything the Council had. Every shot was precise, calculated. They were not simply trying to defeat the Council, they were trying to break their spirit, to show them the true nature of their power. And yet, the Council's ships did not break. Despite the overwhelming force, despite the odds, they fought back. They had to. There was no other choice. But what was the real cost of this battle? What would the Deathworlders do if they saw the Council's resistance as insufficient? The battle was far from over, and the fate of the galaxy was still uncertain. The Deathworlders had shown their power, but the Council's fleet was not giving up. They would fight to the end, whether or not they were truly worthy of survival. The test had begun, and there was no turning back now. The clash of wills. The violent tremors from the earlier explosions had subsided, but the threat from the Deathworlders was far from over. The Council's ships, though battered and barely holding together, were still functional, and the crew was determined to keep fighting. General Soren's mind raced as he analyzed their situation. They were outclassed in every way, yet they still had a chance, if they could find a way to make the Deathworlders see them as worthy. Damage report. Soren barked, his eyes never leaving the screen. The flashes of weapon fire illuminated the void outside, but the Council's fleet had to hold their ground. Commander Aria quickly ran her fingers across her console, a look of grim concentration on her face. Shields at 40% stir. Hull integrity is failing on several ships, but we've got a few more minutes before total collapse. Soren nodded, his eyes narrowing. We need to stall. We need to show them we're not just another weak species. The battle raged outside, the stark contrast of the Council's fragile ships versus the Deathworlders' devastatingly advanced weaponry, creating an eerie spectacle. For every blast that struck their shields, for every ship that went down in flames, the Council fleet retaliated, desperately firing at the incoming barrage. But it was like using a pebble to stop a tidal wave. Soren's thoughts flashed to the beginning of this galactic crisis. They had sent the SOS out of desperation, pleading for help. The Deathworlders had answered, but the price of their aid had become terrifyingly clear. They were testing them. This was no rescue mission. This was a trial. Braced for impact. Aria shouted, her hands gripping the edge of her console. A huge explosion rocked their ship, and the entire deck seemed to shake violently. The hull groaned under the pressure, but somehow, the ship remained intact. We've lost 3 ships, sir. They're gone, reported Lieutenant Vance, his voice cold with fear. Soren's jaw tightened, but he didn't show it. He couldn't afford to show weakness now, not when they were this close to breaking. We won't let them win, he muttered under his breath, not just to himself, but to the entire bridge. The Council ships, though wounded and severely outmatched, continued to fight as though their very survival depended on it. Because it did. Outside the main viewport, the Deathworlders' fleet shifted. Their ships, sleek and menacing, seemed to be rearranging. It was as if they were sizing up their prey, watching to see who would break first. Soren clenched his fists. These weren't just merciless conquerors. They were calculating, evaluating everything. They are waiting for us to falter, Soren realized aloud. This isn't about a fight. It's a test of resolve. As if to underscore his words, another round of devastating blasts struck, the shockwaves causing a cascade of sparks across the bridge. Soren's officers scrambled to keep their systems online, but even they knew this was unsustainable. The Deathworlders' superior firepower would break them in the end unless. Soren's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Aria's voice, sharp and filled with urgency. "General, we've detected a pattern in their fire. Something's changing." Soren turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "Their ships are no longer just firing randomly," Aria explained, her eyes scanning the data. "There's a method to it. They're waiting for us to do something." "Waiting for us," Soren said, an idea beginning to form in his mind. What if they're not trying to destroy us completely? What if they're trying to force us into making a decision, a move they want to see? That would mean... Aria trailed off as the implications hit her. "That's exactly what it means," Soren said, his eyes now narrowed with determination. "We're playing into their hands by reacting the way we are. It's time to show them we can do more than just survive. We need to make a move." The bridge was silent for a moment as everyone processed the gravity of his words. Soren knew this could be their only chance to turn the tide. If they waited too long, they'd be destroyed. But if they made the wrong move, the Deathworlders would crush them without hesitation. "Prepare a counteroffensive," Soren ordered, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "It's time we stop reacting and start acting." The crew scrambled into action, adrenaline surging as they executed the orders. Outside, the Deathworlders were continuing their relentless assault, but now the Council fleet was starting to fight back differently. The ships that had survived the initial barrage began to maneuver with greater precision. The fleet was coming together, united by the singular goal: survival. Soren watched as his fleet began to form a new formation, moving as one. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to defeat the Deathworlders yet, but it was a start. A start was all they needed. "Fire at will," Soren commanded. The next round of shots fired from the Council's ships was far more coordinated, launching with precision at the Deathworlder fleet. The Deathworlders seemed to pause for a moment. Their ships slowed, the lights across their hulls flickering in unison. Were they surprised by the Council's sudden show of strength? Or was this exactly what they had been waiting for? The exchange continued, with the Deathworlders' weapons striking with terrifying power, but now, the Council ships were striking back with a fury and precision they hadn't shown before. This was no longer just a battle of firepower. This was a clash of wills. For the first time in what seemed like forever, the Council's fleet wasn't just trying to survive. They were fighting for something bigger than their own survival. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. The turning tide. The air on the bridge was tense, thick with the pressure of impending chaos. General Soren stood at the command station, staring out at the stars, the explosions and streaks of light that filled the void. The Council's fleet had shown signs of recovery, but it was still a long way from being able to match the Deathworlders' overwhelming strength. Despite the fierceness of their fight back, there was no doubt in Soren's mind that the next few moments would determine the future of the galaxy. If they couldn't push back now, it would be too late. The Deathworlders would finish what they started, leaving the galaxy in ruins. "General, we've got an incoming transmission," Commander Aria said, her voice tense as she turned to face Soren. "It's encrypted. It's from the Deathworlders." Soren's stomach churned. A message from the enemy. Why would they send one now, in the middle of the battle? His instinct told him it was a trap, a psychological ploy meant to break their resolve. But what if it wasn't? "Put it through," Soren ordered, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. A moment later, the screen blinked to life, revealing a towering figure in a dark, armored suit. The being's face was hidden in shadow, but the weight of its presence filled the entire room. Its voice, when it came, was deep and resonating, like the growl of a predator. "General Soren," the figure intoned, its voice laced with a terrifying calm. "We have observed your fleet's actions. We are impressed, but you are still weak. You fight with desperation, but you do not understand what you are up against." Soren stood firm, his heart racing, but his expression unreadable. "What do you want?" The figure let out a low, almost amused chuckle. "What do we want? We are offering you a chance. a chance to prove your worth. Join us, and you will be granted power beyond anything you can imagine. Fight with us, and we will grant you dominion over your enemies. Refuse, and your fate is sealed." The transmission cut off before Soren could respond, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. "General," Arya asked, her voice shaky as she glanced toward him. Soren was quiet for a moment, processing the message. The offer was tempting, too tempting. They were being offered power, something that could turn the tide of the war. But at what cost? "No," Soren said, his voice firm. "We will not surrender to them. Not now, not ever. They want us to kneel before them, and I will not have it. We fight for ourselves, for our people. If we fall on our terms." The crew exchanged glances, nodding their agreement. The Deathworlders had underestimated them. They were not here to serve, no matter the cost. "Prepare to engage," Soren commanded, his resolve hardening. "We show them the true meaning of resistance." Outside, the battle raged on. The Deathworlder fleet, vast and seemingly unstoppable, loomed like a storm on the horizon. But the Council's fleet, though battered and worn, had come together like a single, unified force. They were no longer just a collection of ships. They were a symbol of defiance. And now, with renewed purpose, they were ready to face the Deathworlders head-on. "Captain, get our fleet into position. We're going to make them regret underestimating us." "Yes, General," Captain Duran replied, already relaying orders to his team. The fleet shifted, changing formation to something more aggressive, more tactical. It was a risk, but the only one that could work now. The Deathworlders' fleet had no idea what they were about to face. Their ships were fast, lethal, and equipped with the most advanced weaponry the galaxy had ever seen. But they didn't know the Council. They didn't understand what these people had been through, what they were capable of when pushed to their limits. The Council might have been outclassed in terms of firepower, but they weren't out of options. As the Council fleet engaged, the Deathworlder ships hesitated for a brief moment, as if caught off guard by the sudden shift in tactics. The Council fleet wasn't fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting to win. And for the first time, it seemed like the Deathworlders didn't have complete control. A barrage of fire tore through the dark expanse of space as the Council's ships struck back with precision and ferocity. One of the Deathworlder cruisers exploded in a flash of brilliant white, sending shockwaves rippling through the battlefield. The tides of war were shifting. Soren's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the scene unfold before him. For the first time in this entire war, he felt a sense of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to drive them forward. The Deathworlders had made a mistake. They had underestimated the Council's will to survive, and now they would see exactly how wrong they were. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a war for the future of the galaxy. And the Council wasn't going to lose. The wrath of the Deathworlders. The battlefield was a swirling mass of chaos. The dark void of space seemed alive with the flashes of explosions, laser beams, and the distant roar of dying starships. For a moment, it felt as if the entire galaxy was caught in the grip of an unstoppable storm. On the bridge of the Council flagship, General Soren stared out into the void. The glow of the stars was faint behind the inferno of combat. His mind raced. They had pushed the Deathworlders back for the first time since the beginning of the war, but it was far from over. The Deathworlders were not the type to give up easily, and the battle was about to become even more brutal. "They're regrouping," Captain Duran reported, his voice tight. They'd formed a new formation. "It's unlike anything we've seen before." Soren clenched his fists. He knew this was coming. The Deathworlders were masters of warfare, and they wouldn't let themselves be pushed back for long. "Prepare our fleet," Soren ordered. "We hold them back, no matter the cost." The fleet's morale had improved after their unexpected success, but the message from the Deathworlders still echoed in Soren's mind. The enemy had offered them power, a chance to join forces, to stop the fighting. But Soren had refused. The Council could not bend. They had seen too much, lost too much. They would fight, or they would fall. "General." Commander Aria called out, her voice trembling with urgency. "Look at the main fleet. There." Before she could finish, the entire ship shuddered. A wave of pressure filled the room, followed by a terrifying silence. Soren's heart skipped a beat as the ship's warning systems blared, indicating massive damage to the outer hull. "Damage report," Soren barked. "We've taken a direct hit," the tactical officer responded, panic creeping into his voice. "Our shields are down to 40%. Hull integrity is compromised on the port side." "Brace for impact," Soren ordered, his voice unshaken. "We're not stopping until the last of them is gone." The Deathworlders' fleet had finally shown its true power. Their ships were massive, capable of absorbing and withstanding far more damage than the Council's ships. The sudden shift in tactics was brutal, with the Deathworlders unleashing weapons far beyond the Council's technology. Energy pulses, gravity wells, and powerful shockwaves pushed the Council back. The Council ships returned fire with all their might, but it was clear that they were outmatched. Still, they fought on. They fought for survival, for the future of their people. Soren gritted his teeth as another wave of enemy fire slammed into their flagship. The bridge shook violently, and alarms screamed in the background. But the general remained calm. The enemy could throw everything they had at them, but the Council would not yield. "This is not over," Soren shouted to his crew. "We'll find a way to turn this around. We are the last hope of the galaxy, and we will not fall." The crew's resolve hardened at his words. They had come too far to give up now. The Deathworlders may have had superior firepower, but they lacked something the Council had: a reason to fight. The Council had something worth protecting: their families, their home, their freedom. The Deathworlders had nothing but conquest. "Captain, target their lead ship," Soren commanded. "If we take down their command vessel, we might be able to cripple their fleet." "Yes, General," Captain Duran responded immediately, his eyes focused on the tactical display. As the fleet rallied, a new determination filled the air. It was a desperate hope, a last-ditch effort. But it was their only chance. The Council's fleet moved as one, concentrated fire aimed at the lead Deathworlder vessel. The lights flickered as the energy surged through their weapons. A barrage of laser fire and missiles rained down on the massive ship, ripping into its hull. For a brief moment, it seemed like they had the upper hand. The enemy vessel began to falter, its shields weakening as explosions erupted across its surface. But the Deathworlders weren't finished yet. As the Council's fleet pushed forward, they launched a final counterattack. A storm of missiles, plasma blasts, and ion energy swarmed toward the Council fleet. The intensity of the battle escalated as the Deathworlders' final retaliation slammed into the Council's ships, pushing them to the brink of collapse. Soren's heart pounded as he watched his fleet struggle to hold the line. But through the chaos, one thing was clear: the Council was not going down without a fight. "This is it," Soren thought to himself. "We fight to the last ship, to the last man. If we fall together." And then, through the haze of battle, something unexpected happened. The Deathworlders' flagship suddenly began to retreat. Their fleet broke formation, and they pulled back into the depths of space. "What's happening?" Commander Aria asked, her voice full of disbelief. "Are they retreating?" Captain Joran asked, his eyes wide. "They're pulling back," Soren said, his voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Why?" The Council fleet, still reeling from the assault, watched in stunned silence as the Deathworlder ships disappeared into the darkness of space. The battle, which had seemed lost only moments before, was suddenly over. Soren couldn't believe it. The Deathworlders, the most feared species in the galaxy, had retreated. What just happened? Aria asked again, but there was no immediate answer. It was a victory, but one filled with more questions than answers. The battle had ended, But the war, that was far from over. The silence before the storm, the quiet after the battle was unnerving. The vast emptiness of space stretched out, devoid of the sounds of combat that had filled the air moments before. The Council fleet was battered and broken, but they were alive. And for now, that was enough. General Soren stood on the bridge, staring at the stars as they slowly began to fade into view through the viewport. The enemy fleet, once a terrifying presence, had disappeared into the darkness. It was hard to believe. The Deathworlders, who had fought with an unmatched ferocity, had simply retreated. General, Captain Duran's voice broke through the silence. We need to assess the damage. Our fleet is in no condition to pursue. We need repairs, and fast. Soren nodded, but his thoughts were far from the repairs. The silence in the aftermath felt like a looming storm, just waiting to strike again. What do we do now? Commander Arya asked, her voice full of uncertainty. Are we preparing for their next attack? Soren turned from the viewport to face his crew. Their faces were a mix of exhaustion, confusion, and hope. Hope that had only just begun to blossom after the seemingly impossible retreat of the Deathworlders. We wait, Soren said. We rebuild. We prepare. But why did they retreat? Arya asked again, her voice strained with frustration. We were winning, but they just left. I don't know, Soren replied. But I suspect they're regrouping. They won't just vanish. Not after what we've seen them capable of. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The Deathworlders had never retreated like this before. Their reputation was built on ruthless, unstoppable aggression. Yet, here they were, pulling back after a battle that could have shattered the Council's fleet. Soren's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Why now? Why this strange, sudden retreat? We need to stay vigilant, Soren continued. Whatever their next move is, we have to be ready. They may have pulled back, but they're not done. They never are. A tense silence filled the bridge as Soren's words sank in. The fleet, while battered, was not defeated. The Council still had strength, and now, with the Deathworlders pulling back, they had a chance. But the threat was far from over. Hours passed, and the mood aboard the flagship was grim. The crew moved in silence, knowing that a momentary victory was all they had for now. The repairs were underway, but they were slow. Every ship had taken damage, and the tech teams worked tirelessly to restore systems and keep the fleet operational. But it wasn't just the ships that needed repair. Soren could feel the tension among his officers. They were on edge, waiting for the next move. It wasn't long before the calm was broken. A warning blared on the bridge as an officer's voice shouted from the communications console. General, we're receiving a message. It's from the Deathworlders. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Soren. Put it through, he ordered, his voice steady despite the unease in his chest. The screen flickered to life, and the face of an alien commander appeared. His eyes were cold, calculating, yet there was something different about him. A message, clear and direct, flashed across the screen. Council, the voice of the Deathworlder commander, rang out, low and menacing. This is not over. You have shown that you are capable of fighting, but you will never understand the price of defying us. We will return. You have been warned. The screen went black. The crew stood in stunned silence, processing the words that echoed in the quiet room. They're coming back, Captain Duran said, his voice low. Not yet, Soren replied, his mind racing. But they will. What should we do, General? Arya asked, her voice full of urgency. Do we prepare for an attack? Soren stared at the empty screen, his expression hardening. The message was clear. The Deathworlders weren't finished. They had only just begun. But the question remained, when would they return? How would they strike? And could the Council fleet withstand the full force of their next attack? We prepare, Soren said, his voice resolute. We rebuild, we strengthen our defenses, and we keep watch. The Deathworlders will come back, and this time, we will be ready for them. But deep inside, Soren knew there was more at stake than just a battle. The Deathworlders were not just a threat. They were a warning, a reminder that no matter how hard the Council fought, there were forces in the galaxy beyond their control, and the price of defying those forces might be higher than they could ever imagine. The days ahead would be filled with uncertainty, and the battle would rage on. But one thing was clear: the fate of the galaxy was no longer just in the hands of the Council. It rested in the hands of the Deathworlders, and Soren had no idea what their next move would be. The final confrontation. Days turned into weeks as the Council fleet, now fully repaired, drifted through the vast emptiness of space. The message from the Deathworlders still haunted General Soren's mind. Every officer aboard the flagship knew it was only a matter of time before the terrifying alien force would return. The tension in the fleet was palpable, the calm before the storm stretching on with no sign of the enemy. But everyone knew the silence was deceptive. The real battle was yet to come. Soren spent his days in the command center, constantly reviewing intelligence reports, training his crew, and overseeing preparations for the inevitable conflict. Despite their strength, the fleet had suffered serious losses, yet there was no question in Soren's mind. The Council had to be ready for anything. They had to be prepared for the Deathworlders' next move, and this time, they couldn't afford to make mistakes. The Council had given them no backup. It was just the fleet, and the fate of billions rested on their shoulders. Late one night, as Soren stood alone on the bridge, staring at the dark expanse of space, the alert sounded. The screen flashed red, indicating an incoming signal. The crew rushed to their posts, and Soren's pulse quickened. The message was from an unknown source. For a moment, the possibility of it being another warning from the Deathworlders seemed too real to ignore. "Put it through," Soren commanded. The screen flickered to life. A face appeared, not one of the Deathworlders, but that of a human. The man was older, wearing the insignia of a fleet long forgotten, a fleet that had once fought alongside the Council, but had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. "General Soren," the man said, his voice calm but urgent. "I know you're waiting for them to come, but you need to understand something crucial." Soren leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "Who are you?" "I'm Admiral Korin," the man said. "I represent the remnants of humanity's deep space fleet. We were the first to encounter the Deathworlders, and we failed. They are unlike anything you've faced before. They know no mercy, no forgiveness. But you can still stand a chance." Soren's heart pounded in his chest. A fleet of humanity's survivors. The Council had never mentioned such a group. Where had they been? And more importantly, what did they know about the Deathworlders that could help the Council survive this war? "Their next strike," Admiral Korin continued, "will be their final one. We've studied them, watched their patterns. They're building something, a weapon, a force beyond anything you've ever encountered. You need to strike first. You must attack before they have the chance to unleash it. Are you suggesting we attack them in their own territory?" Soren's voice was incredulous. "We barely survived the last battle." "The time for hesitation is over," Korin said. "They're planning something catastrophic, and if you wait too long, it will be the end of everything you know. If we don't strike now, if we don't show them that we are not weak, we won't survive. But you need more ships. You need more firepower. And I can help with that." Soren's mind raced. This was more than a fight for survival. It was a race against time, against a deadly force that had already proven it could wipe out fleets without mercy. The Deathworlders were coming, and now they were more prepared than ever. "We can't do it alone," Soren muttered. "We need reinforcements. We need everything we can get." "I'll provide the fleet," Admiral Korin replied. "But you need to act quickly. They will come for you soon, and it won't be long before they send their full force." Soren knew this was the moment, the final choice. The battle would be fought in the next few days, maybe hours. Everything had led to this point. He turned to his officers, who were gathered around the war table, listening intently. The fate of the galaxy rested on this one decision. Would they strike first and risk everything in a desperate bid for survival, or would they wait, hoping the Deathworlders wouldn't be able to unleash their devastating weapon? "We do it," Soren said firmly. "We take the fight to them. We take everything they have, and we do not back down." The room filled with a collective sense of resolve, the officers all nodding in agreement. They would no longer be on the defensive. This was their last chance, and they would take it. The next few days were a blur of preparation. The fleet was bolstered by Admiral Corrin's ships, the remnants of humanity's lost forces. Together, they would form a formidable force, an unstoppable tide that would crash against the Deathworlders' might. As they moved toward the Deathworlders' territory, Soren felt a mix of dread and anticipation. The battle ahead would determine the galaxy's future. He had no illusions about the danger that lay before them. But there was no turning back now. The Deathworlders were waiting, and this time they would not be caught off guard. The time for answers was over. The final confrontation was about to begin, and only one side would be left standing when the dust settled.